The incessant drone of my car's engine had been my only companion for the past 4 hours. As a traveling salesman, I was used to long drives, but this particular journey through rural Alabama was testing my limits. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, a beautiful sight that contrasted sharply with my growing unease. I glanced at my phone, securely fastened to the dashboard. The GPS app showed a straight line stretching into what seemed like infinity. In 2.5 miles, turn right onto County Road 237, the robotic voice instructed. I squinted at the road ahead, seeing nothing but an endless stretch of asphalt flanked by dense forests. "Come on, Mike," I muttered to myself. "You've done this 1,000 times, it's just another sales trip." But something felt off. The shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, as if reaching out to ensnare my car. As the indicated distance approached, I slowed down, searching for any sign of the turn. There it was, barely visible in the fading light, a dirt road branching off to the right. No street sign, no markings, just a narrow path disappearing into the woods. My hand hovered over the turn signal. This couldn't be right. County roads were usually paved, weren't they? I pulled over to the side of the main road, the gravel crunching under my tires. With a deep breath, I picked up my phone, intending to double-check the route. "No service," flashed the screen mockingly. Damn it! I slammed my hand against the steering wheel. The action caused my phone to slip from its mount, clattering to the floor of the passenger side. As I leaned over to retrieve it, a flash of movement caught my eye. Something dark darted across the road ahead, disappearing into the underbrush. My heart rate spiked. A deer? A person? Or just my imagination playing tricks on me in the growing darkness? I sat up, phone forgotten, and peered into the rear-view mirror. The main road stretched empty behind me, no headlights in sight. I hadn't passed another vehicle in at least an hour. The GPS chimed again, startling me. Recalculating, in 100 feet, turn right onto County Road 237. I looked at the dirt road again. It seemed to beckon, a gaping maw ready to swallow me whole. But what choice did I have? I couldn't sit here all night, and turning back meant hours of backtracking. With a resigned sigh, I put the car in drive and turned onto the unpaved path. The moment my tires hit the dirt, I knew I'd made a mistake. The road was barely wide enough for my sedan, branches scraping against the sides like skeletal fingers. I crawled forward at a snail's pace, wincing at every bump and jolt. "This is insane," I said aloud, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the confines of the car. I should turn back. But even as the thought formed, I realized I couldn't. The road was too narrow, with no place to turn around. I'd have to keep going and hope it widened out soon. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The forest pressed in on all sides, the trees forming a canopy that blocked out what little remaining daylight there was. I flicked on my headlights, the beams cutting through the gloom like a knife. Suddenly, my car shuddered. A strange noise emanated from under the hood, a sputtering cough that sent a chill down my spine. "No, no, no," I pleaded, patting the dashboard as if I could encourage the vehicle through sheer will. "Come on, baby, don't do this to me." The engine coughed again, then died. The sudden silence was deafening. I coasted to a stop, my headlights illuminating nothing but an endless tunnel of trees. My heart raced as I realized I was completely lost, the GPS having led me down this godforsaken dirt road. Panic set in as my car sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. I turned the key in the ignition once, twice, 3 times. Each attempt was met with a weak whine, but the engine refused to turn over. Shit! I slammed my hands against the steering wheel, the sharp pain a welcome distraction from the fear threatening to overwhelm me. I needed to think, to plan. First things first. Call for help. I fumbled for my phone, nearly dropping it in my haste. The no service message still mocked me from the screen. Of course, I was probably miles from the nearest cell tower. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to center myself. "Okay, Mike," I said aloud, needing to hear a human voice even if it was my own. You're a problem solver. That's why you're so good at sales. So solve this problem. Opening my eyes, I peered out into the darkness. The eerie silence of the surrounding woods sent chills down my spine as I contemplated my next move. I had two choices: stay with the car and hope someone came along, or start walking and try to find help. Neither option seemed particularly appealing, but sitting here doing nothing wasn't going to solve anything. Decision made, I reached for the door handle, then paused. What if there were wild animals out there? Bears? Wolves? I laughed nervously at my own paranoia. Get a grip, Mike. This isn't some horror movie. Even so, I rummaged in the glove compartment until I found the small flashlight I kept for emergencies. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Taking another deep breath, I pushed open the car door. The cool night air hit me like a slap in the face, carrying with it the sense of damp earth and decaying leaves. The woods seemed to come alive with sound the moment I stepped out of the car. The rustle of leaves, the creak of branches, the distant hoot of an owl. Each noise made me jump, my imagination conjuring threats from every shadow. I swept the flashlight beam in a wide arc, searching for... what? A house? A road sign? Anything that might indicate civilization. But there was nothing, just trees stretching as far as the weak light could penetrate. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness, and I whirled around, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Is anyone there?" Only the echo of my own voice answered me. I laughed nervously, running a hand through my hair. "Pull yourself together," I muttered. "You're a grown man, for crying out loud." I turned back to the car, intending to grab my jacket, and froze. There, in the beam of my flashlight, was a pair of eyes reflecting the light. They blinked once, then vanished. A scream caught in my throat as I scrambled back into the car, slamming the door shut and engaging the locks. My breath came in short, sharp gasps as I stared wide-eyed into the darkness beyond the windshield. Minutes ticked by, each second stretching into eternity as I waited for something. An attack, a face at the window, anything. But there was nothing, just the oppressive silence of the forest. As my panic slowly subsided, embarrassment took its place. What had I seen? Probably just a raccoon or a possum. Nothing to be afraid of. And yet, the fear lingered, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. I glanced at my watch. 9:47 p.m. I had a decision to make. I could spend an uncomfortable night in the car and try to flag down help in the morning, or I could start walking now and hope to find a house or a main road. The thought of spending the night here alone in the dark was almost unbearable, but the idea of wandering through unknown woods in the middle of the night wasn't much better. Just as I was about to resign myself to a sleepless night in the car, a pinprick of light caught my eye. I blinked, sure I was imagining things. But no. There it was again. A faint, flickering light in the distance. Relief washed over me as I spotted what looked like a rustic cabin, a glimmer of hope in this desolate place. It was hard to judge distances in the dark, but it couldn't be more than a mile away. Surely I could make that. I gathered my courage, pocketed my phone and car keys, and gripped the flashlight tightly. "You can do this, Mike," I said aloud, trying to inject confidence into my voice. "It's just a short walk. You'll be sitting in a warm kitchen with a cup of coffee in no time." With one last deep breath, I opened the car door and stepped out into the night. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. I locked the car, a futile gesture out here, but habits die hard, and set off towards the distant light. Each step was a battle against my own fear. The beam of my flashlight carved a narrow path through the darkness, but it also created deep shadows that seemed to move and shift in my peripheral vision. More than once I whirled around, certain I'd heard footsteps behind me, only to find nothing but empty forest. As I drew closer to the light, details began to emerge. It was indeed a cabin, small and weathered, with a porch that sagged slightly to one side. A single window glowed with warm yellow light. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth and comfort. My stomach churned with unease as I approached the cabin, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the stillness. Something about this place felt off. Maybe it was the way the cabin seemed to lean slightly, as if it might topple over at any moment. Or maybe it was the utter silence. Shouldn't there be a dog barking at my approach or the sound of a television from inside? I paused at the foot of the porch steps, suddenly unsure. Was I making a mistake? Should I turn back? But where would I go? Back to the car, to sit in the dark and hope for rescue? No, I had to do this. I had to ask for help. I climbed the creaking steps, each board groaning under my weight as if in protest. At the door, I hesitated again, my hand raised to knock. The light in the window flickered, casting strange dancing shadows across the porch. "Come on, Mike," I whispered to myself. "Don't be a coward." I rapped my knuckles against the weathered wood, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet night. For a long moment there was no response. Then, from inside, came the sound of heavy footsteps. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited, equal parts hopeful and terrified. The footsteps grew louder, and then the door began to open with a long, drawn-out creak. A face appeared in the gap, weathered, lined, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. The man, for it was a man, despite my initial shock at his appearance, regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Well now," he said, his voice a gravelly drawl. "What brings a fella like you out to these parts at this time of night?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Something in the man's gaze made my skin crawl, a hungry look that had nothing to do with food. As I stood there, frozen in indecision, one thought echoed through my mind. I've made a terrible mistake. The door creaked open wider, revealing the full figure of the man before me. He was tall and lean, with a shock of gray hair that seemed to defy gravity. His clothes were worn and patched, hanging loosely on his frame. But it was his eyes that held my attention, pale blue, almost colorless, with a glint that made my stomach churn. I'm sorry to bother you," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "My car broke down on the dirt road back there. I was hoping I could use a phone to call for help." The man's thin lips stretched into what I suppose was meant to be a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ain't got no phone here, stranger. We like to keep things simple." He paused, seeming to consider something. "Name's Cletus. And you are?" I hesitated for a moment before answering. Mike Thompson." Cletus nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving my face. "Well, Mike Thompson can't leave you out here in the cold now, can I? Why don't you come on in and warm yourself by the fire? We can figure out what to do about your predicament." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But where would I go? Back to my useless car? Into the dark, unfamiliar woods? At least here there was light, warmth, and the possibility of help. "Thank you," I said, forcing a smile. "That's very kind of you." Cletus's warm hospitality felt like a lifeline, but something in his eyes made my skin crawl. He stepped back, gesturing for me to enter. As I crossed the threshold, the floorboards creaked ominously under my feet. The interior of the cabin was dimly lit by a few oil lamps and a crackling fire in a stone hearth. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and something else, something I couldn't quite identify. It was a metallic scent, vaguely familiar but out of place. "Have a seat," Cletus said, pointing to a worn armchair near the fire. "I'll fetch you something to drink. You look like you could use it." As he disappeared into what I assumed was the kitchen, I took the opportunity to survey my surroundings. The cabin was sparsely furnished, with mismatched furniture that had seen better days. The walls were adorned with hunting trophies, deer heads, mounted fish, And was that a human skull? I blinked and looked again, but in the flickering light I couldn't be sure. Cletus returned carrying 2 mason jars filled with a clear liquid. He handed one to me before settling into a chair opposite mine. "It ain't fancy," he said, raising his jar in a toast, "but it'll put hair on your chest." I sniffed the contents cautiously. The sharp, astringent smell made my eyes water. Moonshine, I realized with a start. I'd heard about homemade liquor, but I'd never actually encountered it. "Go on," Cletus urged, his pale eyes fixed on me. "It'll help calm your nerves." Not wanting to offend my host, I took a small sip. The liquor burned a fiery path down my throat, making me cough and sputter. Cletus let out a raspy laugh. "First time's always the hardest," he said, taking a long swallow from his own jar. "Gets easier with practice." As I sipped the offered drink, a wave of dizziness hit me, and I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. The room seemed to swim before my eyes, the shadows on the walls elongating and twisting into grotesque shapes. "Strong stuff," I managed to say, setting the jar down on a nearby table. "Look, Mr. Cletus, I really appreciate your hospitality, but I should probably be going. If you could just point me in the direction of the nearest town." "Nonsense," Cletus interrupted, leaning forward in his chair. "You can't go wandering around these woods at night, all manner of creatures out there. No, you'll stay here tonight. We'll sort out your car in the morning." The finality in his tone sent a chill down my spine. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my lips as the sound of a door opening echoed through the cabin. "Pa? You home?" a female voice called out. "In here, Mabel," Cletus responded, his eyes never leaving my face. "We've got ourselves a guest." A woman entered the room, and I had to stifle a gasp. She was the spitting image of Cletus, tall, gaunt, with the same pale eyes. Her long gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a faded floral dress that might have been fashionable decades ago. "Well, ain't this a surprise?" Mabel said, her thin lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We don't get many visitors out here." "This here's Mike," Cletus said. "His car broke down on the old dirt road. He'll be staying with us tonight." I stood up, swaying slightly as another wave of dizziness washed over me. "Actually, I was just telling Cletus that I should be going." "Nonsense," Mabel interrupted, her voice sharp. "We insist. It's far too dangerous out there at night. You'll stay here where it's safe." The walls seemed to close in as Cletus's family arrived, their hungry gazes fixed upon me. 2 more figures appeared in the doorway, a burly man with a wild beard and a younger woman whose beauty was marred by a cruel twist to her mouth. "This here's my son Jeb and my daughter Lulu," Cletus introduced them. "Family, meet Mike. He'll be our guest for the evening." Jeb grunted a greeting, while Lulu's eyes raked over me in a way that made me feel like a piece of meat at the butcher's. "Ain't he a fine-looking one, Pa?" Lulu drawled, licking her lips. "Can I have him?" My heart pounded as I realized I was trapped, the truth of my situation dawning with horrifying clarity. These people weren't just strange or unfriendly. There was something fundamentally wrong here. "Now, Lulu," Mabel chided, but there was no real reproach in her tone. "Don't scare our guest, he's only just arrived." I tried to stand, but my legs felt like jelly. The room spun around me, and I had to grip the arm of the chair to keep from falling. I don't feel so good," I mumbled, my tongue feeling thick in my mouth. "What was in that drink?" Cletus chuckled, the sound grating on my nerves. "Just a little something to help you relax, city boy. Can't have you running off into the night now, can we?" Panic surged through me, momentarily clearing the fog in my brain. I lunged for the door, but Jeb was there in an instant, his meaty hands gripping my arms with bruising force. "Let me go," I yelled, struggling against his hold. "You can't do this. People will come looking for me." "Oh, I don't think so," Cletus said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "No one knows you're here, do they? No one's going to miss one more lost traveler." The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't the first time they'd done this. How many others had fallen into their trap? "Please," I begged, my voice cracking. "I have money, I can pay you, just let me go." Mabel approached me, her bony fingers reaching out to stroke my cheek. I flinched away from her touch. "Oh, honey," she cooed. "We don't want your money. We want something far more substantial." A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life. Any moment now I'd wake up in my car, this whole nightmare nothing but a bad dream brought on by exhaustion. But the pain in my arms where Jeb gripped me was all too real. The acrid taste of fear in my mouth couldn't be imagined. "What are you going to do to me?" I whispered, dreading the answer. Lulu sidled up to me, running a finger down my chest. "We're going to have ourselves a feast," she purred. "And you're the main course." The room erupted into laughter. Harsh, grating sounds that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I struggled against Jeb's grip, but it was useless. Whatever they had put in that drink was sapping my strength by the second. "Take him to the cellar," Cletus ordered. "We'll let him stew for a bit before we start the preparations." As Jeb began to drag me away, my legs finally gave out. The last thing I saw before unconsciousness claimed me was the family's eager faces, their pale eyes gleaming with anticipation. My last coherent thought was a desperate prayer. "Please let someone find me. Let this not be the end." Then darkness swallowed me whole, and I knew no more. Consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by a throbbing headache and a mouth that felt like it was stuffed with cotton. I blinked, trying to focus in the dim light. The air was damp and musty, with an underlying scent of decay that made my stomach churn. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in some sort of cellar. Rough stone walls surrounded me, and the floor beneath me was packed dirt. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting sickly yellow light over the space. I tried to move and found my wrists bound behind my back, the coarse rope biting into my skin. My ankles were similarly tied. Panic surged through me as the memories of the previous night came flooding back. "Hello?" I called out, my voice hoarse. "Is anyone there?" A muffled whimper answered me from somewhere in the darkness. I wasn't alone. "Who's there?" I whispered, straining my eyes to see into the shadows. "Please," a female voice responded, barely audible. "Please help me." I shuffled awkwardly, inching towards the sound. As I moved, I saw her, a young woman, probably in her early 20s, bound like me. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes wide with terror. "I'm Mike," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the fear coursing through me. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she replied, her voice trembling. They grabbed me 3 days ago. My car broke down and—" "I know," I interrupted gently. "The same thing happened to me. But we're going to get out of here, okay? We just need to think." Even as I spoke the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. But I had to try. I had to give us both hope. I looked around the cellar, searching for anything that might help us. There was a small window near the ceiling, too high and too small to escape through, but it let in a sliver of daylight. Various tools hung on the walls. Hammers, saws, things I didn't want to think about too closely. "Sarah," I whispered, "can you see anything sharp near you? Anything we could use to cut these ropes?" She twisted her head, scanning the area around her. There's a broken bottle, just out of reach." I nodded, hope flaring in my chest. "Okay, good. That's good. We just need to—" The sound of a door opening above us cut me off. Heavy footsteps descended wooden stairs, and I quickly shuffled back to my original position, hoping our captors hadn't heard us talking. Cletus appeared, followed closely by Jeb. The older man's pale eyes swept over us, a smile playing on his thin lips. Well, he drawled. "Looks like our guests are awake. How are y'all feeling this fine morning?" I glared at him, mustering all the defiance I could. "You won't get away with this," I spat. "People will come looking for us." Cletus laughed, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "Oh, city boy, you still don't get it, do you? Ain't nobody coming for you. You're ours now." Jeb moved towards Sarah, who shrank back against the wall. "Pa, can't we start with this one? She's been tenderizing for days now." "Patience, boy," Cletus admonished. "Good things come to those who wait. Besides, we got preparations to make. Can't rush these things." As they talked about us like we were nothing more than cattle, I felt something snap inside me. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I made a break for it, somehow managing to get to my feet despite my bound ankles. I lunged forward, catching Cletus off guard and ramming my shoulder into his stomach. He stumbled back with a grunt of surprise, crashing into Jeb. "Run, Sarah," I yelled, even though I knew it was futile. Where could we go, tied up as we were? Jeb recovered quickly, his meaty hand closing around my throat. He slammed me against the wall, stars exploding behind my eyes. "Thought you'd try to be a hero, huh?" He growled, his foul breath hot on my face. "Guess we'll have to teach you a lesson." Cletus straightened up, brushing dirt from his clothes. His earlier amusement was gone, replaced by cold anger. "Take him upstairs," he ordered Jeb. "It's time we showed our guests some real Southern hospitality." Terror gripped me as Jeb dragged me towards the stairs, my bound feet scraping against the dirt floor. I could hear Sarah sobbing behind us. "Please," I gasped, struggling to breathe through Jeb's grip on my throat. "You don't have to do this. Just let us go. We won't tell anyone, I swear." Cletus paused at the foot of the stairs, turning to look at me with those unsettling pale eyes. "Oh, but we do have to do this, Mike. It's what we are. It's what we've always been. And you? You're just meat." As Jeb hauled me up the stairs, I caught one last glimpse of Sarah, her eyes wide with horror. I silently promised her I'd find a way to save us both, even as doubt gnawed at my insides. The kitchen was brightly lit, a stark contrast to the gloom of the cellar. Mabel stood at the sink, humming tunelessly as she sharpened a large knife. She turned as we entered, her thin lips curving into a smile that made my blood run cold. "Well, look who's joined us for breakfast," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "Though I suppose you'll be more the meal than the guest, won't you, dear?" Lulu lounged at the kitchen table, her eyes lighting up as Jeb shoved me into a chair. "Can we start now, Ma? I'm starving." "Patience, child," Mabel chided. "Your father has to bless the meal first. It's tradition." As they discussed the logistics of my impending doom, my eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking any means of escape. The door was just a few feet away, tantalizingly close. If I could just get my hands free. Cletus entered the kitchen, carrying an old leather-bound book. He set it on the table and opened it to a marked page. The others fell silent, bowing their heads. I ducked, feeling the blade whistle over my head. Without thinking, I drove my shoulder into her midsection, using her own momentum to send her crashing into the table. The door was right there. Freedom was just steps away. But Sarah was still in the cellar. I couldn't leave her. I hesitated for a split second, and it nearly cost me everything. Cletus's hand closed around my arm, his grip like iron. "You're a fighter, I'll give you that," he snarled. "But this ends now." I saw Lulu approaching from the corner of my eye, a manic grin on her face as she raised her knife. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I drove my elbow back, catching Cletus in the solar plexus. As his grip loosened, I spun, bringing the skillet around in a wide arc. It connected with Lulu's wrist with a sharp crack. The knife clattered to the floor as she screamed in pain. Not waiting to see if they'd recover, I bolted for the door. I yanked it open, the bright morning sunlight momentarily blinding me. "After him!" I heard Cletus roar behind me. "Don't let him get away." Adrenaline coursed through me as I made a break for it, crashing through the underbrush. Terror gripped me as I heard their whoops and hollers, the thrill of the hunt evident in their voices. The forest was a blur around me as I ran, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. But I didn't slow down. I couldn't. To stop was to die. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, the sound of pursuit growing ever closer. They knew these woods, I realized with growing dread. This was their hunting ground, and I was nothing more than prey. A glimmer of hope sparked as I spotted my car in the distance, a potential salvation. If I could just reach it, maybe I could get it started, or at least use it as shelter until help arrived. But as I burst into the small clearing where I'd left my vehicle, despair overwhelmed me as I found the car still dead. My last chance at escape cruelly snatched away. I leaned against the cold metal, gasping for breath. The sounds of pursuit were getting closer. I had only moments before they found me. As I stood there, caught between the urge to keep running and the knowledge that it was futile, a single thought echoed through my mind. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry. The bushes at the edge of the clearing rustled, and I tensed, preparing for my final stand. Whatever happened next, I vowed I wouldn't go down without a fight. As the first of my pursuers emerged from the tree line, I gripped the car door handle, ready to use it as a shield or a weapon, whatever it took to survive. The hunt was on, and I was determined not to be their prey any longer. My heart pounded in my chest as I faced my pursuers, the car door my only shield against the horrors that emerged from the tree line. Cletus was the first to appear, his lean frame belying a surprising agility for his age. Close behind him came Jeb, a nasty gash on his forehead where I'd struck him with the skillet, his eyes blazing with murderous intent. "Nowhere to run now, city boy," Cletus called out, his voice eerily calm. "Why don't you make this easy on yourself and come on back to the house? We've got a nice hot meal waiting for you." His lips curled into a grotesque smile at his own twisted joke. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice as I responded. "Stay back. I'm warning you." Jeb let out a harsh laugh. "Or what? You'll hit us with that car door? Face it, you're done for." They began to spread out, attempting to flank me. I knew I couldn't keep my eyes on both of them at once. My mind raced, desperately seeking a way out of this nightmare. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed through the woods, causing all of us to freeze. It was a woman's voice, Sarah's voice, filled with terror and pain. Cletus's pale eyes flickered with annoyance. Damn it, I told Mabel to wait. The momentary distraction was all I needed. I lunged forward, catching Cletus off guard and shoving him hard. He stumbled backward, crashing into Jeb. Before they could recover, I was off, plunging back into the dense undergrowth. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, my feet pounding against the forest floor. I could hear them crashing through the woods behind me, their enraged shouts spurring me on despite the burning in my lungs and the ache in my muscles. I had no idea where I was going, no plan beyond putting as much distance between myself and those monsters as possible. But Sarah's scream echoed in my mind. I couldn't leave her behind, not to suffer whatever horrific fate awaited her at the hands of that deranged family. The sound of rushing water reached my ears, growing louder with each step. Suddenly the trees thinned, and I found myself on the edge of a steep ravine. A river churned below, its waters swollen and fast-moving from recent rains. I skidded to a stop, nearly losing my balance on the crumbling edge. There was no way across, no way down that didn't end in certain death in the raging waters below. "End of the line, boy." Cletus's voice came from behind me, slightly winded but triumphant. "Ain't nowhere left to run." I turned slowly, my back to the precipice. Cletus and Jeb emerged from the tree line, both looking worse for wear, but with a predatory gleam in their eyes that chilled me to the bone. "Please," I tried one last time, my voice hoarse. "You don't have to do this. Just let me go. Let Sarah go. I swear we won't tell anyone." Jeb snorted. "And miss out on the best meal we've had in months? Not likely." They began to advance slowly, confident in their victory. I edged backward, feeling loose stones shift under my feet. "You know," Cletus said conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather, "I've always wondered what it'd be like to eat someone who died from a fall. Tenderizes the meat something fierce, I'd imagine." The implication was clear. One way or another, I wasn't leaving this ravine alive. In that moment, as I stood on the literal edge between life and death, time seemed to slow. I thought of Sarah, still trapped in that hellish cellar. I thought of my family, who would never know what happened to me. And I thought of these monsters, who would continue to prey on innocent people if I didn't find a way to stop them. I made my decision in a split second. As Cletus lunged forward to grab me, I let myself fall backward into empty air. The world spun around me as I plummeted toward the churning river below. I heard Cletus's enraged roar, cut off abruptly as I hit the water with a bone-jarring impact. The cold shocked the breath from my lungs as I was immediately swept downstream by the powerful current. I flailed desperately, trying to keep my head above water as I was tossed about like a rag doll. Rocks loomed ahead, the water frothing white around them. I barely had time to take a breath before I was slammed against one, pain exploding through my side. The world went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I was lying face down on a muddy riverbank, every inch of my body screaming in agony. The sound of the river was more distant now, a dull roar rather than the deafening rush it had been before. With a groan, I pushed myself up onto my hands and knees, spitting out muddy water. I was alive against all odds, but I was far from safe. As my senses slowly returned, I became aware of voices nearby. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought Cletus and his family had found me. But these voices were different, younger, and filled with confusion rather than malice. Dude, is that a person? Holy shit, I think it is. Hey, mister, are you okay? I looked up to see two teenage boys standing a few yards away, fishing poles in hand and expressions of shock on their faces. Help, I managed to croak out. Please, help me. They rushed forward, dropping their gear. The taller of the two knelt beside me, his face pale with concern. What happened to you, man? You look like you've been through hell. If only he knew how accurate that statement was. Car broke down, I gasped out. People, bad people, they're still out there. We need to call the police. The boys exchanged alarmed glances. The shorter one pulled out a cell phone. No signal out here, he said, his voice shaking slightly. We need to get back to the campsite. Our parents have a satellite phone. With their help, I managed to stagger to my feet. Every movement was agony, but the adrenaline coursing through my system kept me going. As we made our way through the woods, I tried to explain what had happened, my words tumbling out in a barely coherent stream. To their credit, the boys, Tim and Alex, they'd introduced themselves, didn't dismiss my wild tale. They listened with growing horror as I described Cletus and his family, and the fate that had nearly befallen me. We have to help the girl, I insisted as we neared their campsite. Sarah, she's still trapped there. Tim nodded grimly. We'll tell the police everything. They'll find her, don't worry. As we emerged into a small clearing where several tents were set up, a middle-aged couple rushed towards us, their faces etched with concern. Boys, what's going on? Who is this? The woman asked, her eyes widening as she took in my battered appearance. Alex quickly explained the situation while Tim's father retrieved the satellite phone. Within minutes, he was connected to the local sheriff's department. I sank onto a camp chair, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm me now that I was relatively safe. But I couldn't rest. Not yet. Not while Sarah was still in danger. When Tim's father handed me the phone, I summoned every ounce of strength I had left to clearly describe Cletus's property, the layout of the house, and where Sarah was being held. The sheriff promised to send deputies immediately and urged us to stay put until they arrived. The waiting was excruciating. Tim's mother, a nurse, tended to my injuries as best she could with their limited first aid supplies. The boys peppered me with questions, their initial fear giving way to a morbid fascination with my ordeal. Just as the sun was beginning to set, we heard the distant wail of sirens. Relief washed over me, so intense it left me lightheaded. Help was finally here. 2 police cruisers pulled into the campsite, followed closely by an ambulance. As the paramedics rushed to check me over, I found myself face to face with Sheriff Dawson, a grizzled man with hard eyes that softened slightly as he took in my condition. Mr. Thompson, he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. "I'm going to need you to tell me everything again, from the beginning. Don't leave out any details, no matter how small they might seem." And so, for what felt like the 100th time, I recounted my horrifying experience. The sheriff listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes or asking for clarification. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and serious. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously. I've got every available deputy headed to the location you described. If this girl Sarah is there, we'll find her." I nodded, feeling a mix of hope and dread. "What about Cletus and his family? You have to stop them before they hurt anyone else." The sheriff's expression darkened. "We've had rumors about that family for years. Nothing concrete enough to act on. But if what you're saying is true, their reign of terror ends tonight." As the paramedics prepared to transport me to the hospital, I caught the sheriff's arm. "Please," I said, my voice breaking. "Please find her. Save her." He met my gaze steadily. "We'll do everything in our power, son. You have my word." As I was loaded into the ambulance, my last sight was of the sheriff barking orders into his radio, mobilizing what sounded like every law enforcement officer in the county. The doors closed, and we began to move. As the adrenaline that had kept me going finally began to ebb, the full weight of my ordeal crashed down upon me. Tears streamed down my face, tears of relief, of fear, of guilt for leaving Sarah behind. "Hang on, Sarah," I whispered as consciousness began to slip away. "Help is coming. Just hang on." As the darkness of exhaustion claimed me, my last coherent thought was a desperate hope that I hadn't escaped that nightmare only to wake up to an even greater one. The race to save Sarah was on, and I prayed with every fiber of my being that it wasn't already too late. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment slowly pulled me from the depths of unconsciousness. My eyelids felt heavy as I struggled to open them, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room momentarily blinding me. As my vision cleared, I became aware of a figure sitting beside my bed, Sheriff Dawson, his weathered face etched with a mixture of concern and determination. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Mr. Thompson," he said, his gravelly voice softer than I remembered. I tried to speak, but my throat was parched. The sheriff quickly offered me a cup of water, which I gratefully accepted. After a few sips, I managed to croak out, "Sarah, did you find her?" The sheriff's expression tightened and my heart sank. "I'm afraid I don't have good news on that front, son. By the time we got to the property, it was deserted. Cletus and his family were gone, and there was no sign of the girl." Despair washed over me. We were too late. I had failed her. "No," I whispered, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "She can't be gone. We have to find her." Sheriff Dawson leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Now listen here, Mr. Thompson. We haven't given up. Far from it. What we found at that property, well, it confirmed everything you told us and then some. We've got a statewide manhunt underway for Cletus and his brood. Every law enforcement agency in Alabama is on high alert." I nodded, trying to take comfort in his words. But the image of Sarah, terrified and alone, wouldn't leave my mind. "What did you find?" I asked, not sure if I really wanted to know the answer. The sheriff hesitated for a moment before responding. "It's not pretty, I'll tell you that." "That cellar you described? We found evidence of multiple victims. Bloodstains, personal effects. It's a goddamn house of horrors down there. Forensics is going through it with a fine-tooth comb." He paused, seeming to debate whether to continue. "There's something else you should know. You weren't the first to escape from them. We found a hidden room in the cellar, and inside..." My breath caught in my throat. "What? What did you find?" "A survivor," he said quietly. "A woman named Emily. She's been there for months, maybe longer. She's in pretty bad shape, both physically and mentally, but she's alive. And she might be our key to finding Sarah and stopping Cletus for good." Hope flickers as I make eye contact with Sheriff Dawson, a silent understanding passing between us. "I need to talk to her," I said, already trying to sit up despite the pain that shot through my body. The sheriff gently but firmly pushed me back down. "Easy there, Tiger. You're in no shape to be going anywhere just yet. The doctors say you've got 2 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and enough cuts and bruises to last a lifetime. You need to rest." "But Sarah," I began to protest. "Is our top priority," he interrupted. "I give you my word, we're doing everything in our power to find her. But right now, the best thing you can do is focus on recovering. We're going to need your help when the time comes. And for that, you need to be at full strength." I wanted to argue, to demand that he take me to Emily right now. But deep down, I knew he was right. I was in no condition to be of any real help at the moment. Reluctantly, I nodded. "Good man," the sheriff said, patting my arm. "Now get some rest. I'll be back to check on you later, and I'll keep you updated on any developments." As he turned to leave, a thought struck me. "Sheriff," I called out. He paused at the door, looking back at me. "Be careful. Cletus and his family, they're not just criminals. They're monsters. Real, honest-to-God monsters." The sheriff's face hardened. "Don't you worry about that, son. We know what we're dealing with, and we're ready for them." With that, he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the incessant beeping of the machines. Despite the sheriff's assurances, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's terrified face, heard her screams echoing through that hellish cellar. Hours passed, marked only by the occasional visit from a nurse to check my vitals. As night fell, casting long shadows across the room, I found myself drifting in and out of a fitful sleep. A sound jolted me awake, a soft scraping noise barely audible over the medical equipment. My eyes snapped open, scanning the darkened room. There, in the corner, a shadow moved. My heart rate spiked, setting off one of the monitors. I reached for the call button, but before I could press it, a hand clamped over my mouth. "Shh," a female voice whispered urgently. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm Emily, the one they found in the cellar." My eyes widened in recognition, and I nodded slowly. She removed her hand, and I took a shaky breath. How did you get in here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily's lips curved into a grim smile. "When you've been held captive as long as I have, you learn a few tricks. Listen, we don't have much time. The nurses will be here soon to check on that alarm." "Why are you here?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around her sudden appearance. "Because we're the only ones who truly understand what we're up against," she said, her voice intense. "The police, they're good people, but they have no idea what Cletus and his family are capable of. If we're going to save Sarah, we need to work together." My heart soars as we manage to communicate through subtle gestures, forming a plan. "I'm in," I said without hesitation. "But how? I can barely move, and you—" I trailed off, taking in her appearance for the first time. Emily was gaunt, her skin pale and marked with scars, but her eyes burned with a fierce determination that I recognized, the look of someone who had been through hell and come out fighting. "I'm stronger than I look," she said, correctly interpreting my hesitation. "And you're tougher than you give yourself credit for. We survived them once. We can do it again." The sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway caught our attention. Emily quickly moved towards the window. "I'll be in touch," she whispered. "Be ready." And then she was gone, slipping out into the night as silently as she had entered. Moments later, a nurse bustled in, frowning at the monitors. "Everything okay in here, Mr. Thompson?" she asked, checking my vitals. I forced a smile. "Just a bad dream," I lied smoothly. "I'm fine now." As she left, I settled back into the bed, my mind racing. Emily was right. We were the only ones who truly understood the horror we were facing. And if there was even a chance we could save Sarah, we had to take it. Determination fuels me as we work together to loosen our bonds, ignoring the pain. Over the next few days, I focused on my recovery with a single-minded intensity that surprised even my doctors. Physical therapy sessions that should have been agonizing became opportunities to regain my strength. Every spare moment was spent planning, preparing for whatever Emily had in mind. On the third night after Emily's visit, as I was dozing fitfully, a soft tap at the window roused me. There she was, gesturing urgently for me to join her. My stomach turns as I realize we've underestimated the true extent of our enemies. With a deep breath, I swung my legs over the side of the bed, wincing at the pain in my ribs. This was it. No turning back now. I disconnected the IV and monitors as quietly as I could, praying that no alarms would sound. Then, moving as quickly as my battered body would allow, I made my way to the window. Emily helped me climb out, supporting my weight as we descended the fire escape. The cool night air hit me like a slap in the face, invigorating after days in the sterile hospital environment. "Are you sure about this?" Emily whispered as we reached the ground. "Once we do this, there's no going back. We'll be fugitives just like them." I met her gaze steadily, seeing my own determination reflected in her eyes. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "We're Sarah's only hope. And maybe, just maybe, we're the ones who can finally end Cletus's reign of terror." She nodded, a grim smile playing on her lips. "Then let's go hunting." As we slipped away into the shadows, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. We were embarking on a dangerous, possibly suicidal mission. But we were also taking control of our own fate, refusing to be victims any longer. The hunt was on, but this time, we were the predators. And God help Cletus and his family when we found them. Emily led me to a battered pickup truck parked a few blocks from the hospital. As we climbed in, I couldn't help but ask, "Where did you get this?" She started the engine, a haunted look crossing her face. "It belonged to another of Cletus's victims. I found it when I escaped. Figured he wouldn't be needing it anymore." The implications of her words hung heavy in the air as we pulled away from the curb. I wanted to ask more, to understand what she had been through during her long captivity. But now wasn't the time. We had a mission to focus on. "So, what's the plan?" I asked as we headed out of town, the lights of the city fading behind us. Emily's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I overheard things during my time in that cellar. Cletus has a network. Safe houses scattered across the state. I think I know where they might have gone." "And Sarah?" I pressed, unable to keep the urgency from my voice. "If she's still alive, that's where she'll be," Emily said grimly. "But Mike, you need to prepare yourself. The things Cletus and his family do. Sarah might not be the same person you remember, even if we do find her." I swallowed hard, pushing down the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. "I understand, but we have to try." Emily nodded, her eyes never leaving the road. "We will, and one way or another, this ends now. Cletus has terrorized people for too long. It's time someone put a stop to it." As we drove into the night, heading towards an uncertain and dangerous future, I realized that this unlikely alliance might be our only chance at salvation. Emily and I, bound by our shared trauma and determination, were about to take on a family of monsters. The road ahead was dark and fraught with peril, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Together, perhaps we could bring an end to the horror and save not just Sarah, but countless future victims as well. With every mile that passed, my resolve strengthened. Cletus and his family had no idea what was coming for them. And when we found them, they would learn the true meaning of fear. The rhythmic hum of tires on asphalt had become a hypnotic backdrop to our journey. Emily and I had been driving for hours, the landscape outside morphing from urban sprawl to rolling countryside and finally to dense, forbidding forest. The sun had long since set, leaving us enveloped in a darkness broken only by the truck's headlights and the occasional lonely street lamp. "We're getting close," Emily murmured, breaking the silence that had settled between us. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, tension radiating from every line of her body. I straightened in my seat, ignoring the twinge of pain from my still healing ribs. "How can you be sure?" Emily's eyes never left the road as she responded, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are signs, things most people wouldn't notice. But when you've been in their world, you learn to see them." As if on cue, we passed a tree with a crude symbol carved into its trunk, a circle with a jagged line through it. To the casual observer, it might have looked like simple vandalism, but the way Emily's breath caught told me it was something far more sinister. "What does it mean?" I asked, dreading the answer. "It's a marker," she replied grimly. "A sign to others like them. It means we're entering their hunting grounds." A chill ran down my spine at her words. The forest suddenly seemed more menacing, the shadows deeper and more foreboding. I found myself scanning the tree line, half expecting to see pale, hungry eyes staring back at us. Emily turned off the main road onto a narrow, unpaved track that wound deeper into the woods. The truck's suspension groaned in protest as we bounced over ruts and exposed roots. "We'll have to go on foot from here," Emily said, bringing the vehicle to a stop in a small clearing. "Their compound is about a mile north. We can't risk them hearing the engine." As we climbed out of the truck, the full weight of what we were about to do hit me. We were two battered survivors armed with nothing but desperation and a handful of makeshift weapons, about to take on a family of cannibalistic killers in their own territory. "Emily," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "are you sure about this? Maybe we should wait for the police or—" She cut me off with a sharp look. "The police won't find this place. And even if they did, they're not equipped to handle what's in there. This is our fight, Mike. We're the only ones who can end this." I nodded, swallowing my fear. She was right, of course. We were in too deep to turn back now. We gathered our meager supplies, a couple of hunting knives, a crowbar, and a backpack filled with first aid supplies and energy bars. As we prepared to set off into the woods, Emily paused, her hand on my arm. "Mike," she said softly, "I need you to understand something. What we're about to see, it's going to be bad. Worse than anything you've experienced so far. If you want to back out, now's the time." I met her gaze steadily, seeing the shadows of her own trauma reflected in her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. "We're in this together." She nodded, a ghost of a smile flickering across her face. "Together then, let's go." We moved through the forest as quietly as we could, every snapping twig and rustling leaf setting my nerves on edge. The darkness seemed to press in around us, broken only by the narrow beam of the flashlight Emily wielded like a weapon. After what felt like hours but was probably only about 45 minutes, Emily held up a hand, signaling me to stop. Ahead, barely visible through the trees, was a flicker of light. "We're here," she whispered, her voice tight with tension. As we crept closer, the compound came into view. It was a ramshackle collection of buildings surrounding a central courtyard. A bonfire burned in the center, casting long, dancing shadows across the scene. And there, moving around the fire, were figures, Cletus and his family, engaged in some sort of ritual that made my blood run cold. "Oh God," I breathed, bile rising in my throat. Are they... Emily's hand clamped down on my arm, her grip painfully tight. "Don't look," she hissed. "Focus. We need to find Sarah." I tore my eyes away from the horrific scene, forcing myself to scan the buildings. That's when I saw it. A small, windowless structure set apart from the others. A heavy padlock secured its door. "There," I whispered, pointing. "That has to be where they're keeping her." Emily nodded grimly. "Okay, here's the plan. I'll create a distraction. While they're occupied, you get to that building and free Sarah. No matter what happens, get her out of here, understand?" I wanted to argue, to insist that we stick together, but I knew she was right. This was our best chance. "Be careful," I said, my voice thick with emotion. She gave me a sad smile. You too. And Mike, if I don't make it, make sure this ends here. Don't let them hurt anyone else. Before I could respond, she was gone, melting into the shadows with a skill born of desperate survival. I counted to 30, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. Then from the other side of the compound came the sound of breaking glass and a blood-curdling scream. Chaos erupts as we fight back, catching our captors off guard with our desperate assault. The family's attention snapped to the source of the disturbance, shouts of alarm and rage filling the air. I seized my chance, darting from cover to cover until I reached the small building. The padlock was heavy and rusted, but adrenaline lent me strength. I brought the crowbar down on it again and again, each impact sending shockwaves of pain through my still-healing body. Finally, with a screech of protesting metal, the lock gave way. I wrenched the door open, gagging at the stench that wafted out. "Sarah?" I called softly, peering into the gloom. "Sarah, are you in here?" A whimper from the corner drew my attention. There, huddled on a filthy mattress, was a figure I barely recognized as the vibrant young woman I'd met in that cellar just days ago. Sarah's eyes were wild with fear and confusion, her body covered in bruises and cuts. "It's okay," I said, approaching her slowly with my hands raised. "I'm here to help. Do you remember me? I'm Mike, from the cellar." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Mike?" she stammered. You came back for me?" "Of course I did," I said, fighting back tears. "Can you walk? We need to get out of here now." I helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as we stumbled towards the door. But as we emerged into the courtyard, my stomach turns as I realize we've underestimated the true extent of our enemies. The scene before us was one of utter chaos. Emily had indeed created a distraction. She'd set fire to one of the buildings and the flames were spreading rapidly. But Cletus and his family weren't running from the blaze. Instead, they were converging on Emily, who was putting up a fierce fight but was clearly outnumbered. "Run!" Emily shouted when she saw us, her voice raw with pain and determination. "Get her out of here." I hesitated, torn between the need to save Sarah and the desire to help Emily. In that moment of indecision, Jeb spotted us. His face split into a feral grin as he changed course, heading straight for us. "Sarah," I said urgently, "I need you to run. Head for the trees, don't stop for anything. Can you do that?" She nodded, her eyes wide with terror. I gave her a gentle push towards the tree line, then turned to face Jeb. My body protested as I raised the crowbar, every muscle screaming in pain. But I pushed through it, fueled by a rage I'd never experienced before. Jeb laughed as he approached, clearly not seeing me as a threat. Well, looks like our little piggy came back to the slaughter." "Not this time," I growled, and swung the crowbar with all my might. My stomach turns as I witness the brutality of our struggle for survival. The metal connected with Jeb's knee with a sickening crunch. He went down with a howl of pain, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Every blow was for Sarah, for Emily, for all the victims who had suffered at the hands of this monstrous family. A surge of triumph courses through me as we gain the upper hand, if only momentarily. Jeb lay motionless at my feet, and for a second, I thought we might actually win this fight. But then I heard Emily scream. I turned to see Cletus dragging her towards the bonfire, a look of maniacal glee on his weathered face. Mabel and Lulu were closing in on Sarah, who had stumbled and fallen just short of the tree line. Horror grips me as I realize we've underestimated the true extent of our enemies. We were hopelessly outnumbered, our brief advantage evaporating like mist in the morning sun. "Emily!" I shouted, starting towards her. But a hand clamped around my ankle, sending me crashing to the ground. Jeb, bloodied but far from defeated, dragged me back, his face a mask of rage and pain. "You shouldn't have come back, boy," he snarled. "Now you get to watch your friends die before we finish you off nice and slow." I struggled against his grip, but my injuries and exhaustion were catching up with me. I could only watch in helpless horror as Cletus lifted Emily, preparing to throw her into the flames. But then, cutting through the chaos, came a sound that froze everyone in their tracks, the wail of police sirens growing louder by the second. "No!" Cletus roared, his face contorting with fury. "How did they find us?" In the moment of confusion that followed, several things happened at once. Emily, seizing her chance, drove her elbow into Cletus's solar plexus, breaking free of his grasp. Sarah, finding a reserve of strength I wouldn't have believed possible, lashed out at Mabel and Lulu, her nails raking across Lulu's face. And I, with one final desperate surge of energy, wrenched myself free from Jeb's grip and staggered to my feet. "Run!" I yelled, my voice hoarse. "Into the woods now!" We fled into the darkness of the forest, the sounds of pursuit and approaching sirens mingling behind us. Branches whipped at our faces, roots threatened to trip us at every step. But we didn't slow down. We couldn't. As we ran, I became aware of a warm, sticky sensation on my side. Looking down, I saw a growing stain of darkness spreading across my shirt. At some point in the fight, I'd been stabbed, the adrenaline masking the pain until now. My world shatters as I watch my newfound ally fall, leaving me alone once more. My legs gave out and I collapsed to the forest floor. "Go," I gasped to Sarah and Emily. "Keep going. I'll slow them down." But they refused to leave me. With Sarah on one side and Emily on the other, they half carried, half dragged me through the underbrush. Behind us, we could hear the sounds of a manhunt in full swing. Shouts, dogs barking, the crack of branches as people moved through the woods. As my vision began to blur, one thought kept me going. We had done it. We had survived. We had fought back, and we had brought the full force of the law down on Cletus and his family. Whatever happened now, their reign of terror was over. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the beam of a flashlight cutting through the darkness and a voice calling out, "Over here! We've found them!" Then mercifully, the world faded to black, and I knew no more. The steady beep of a heart monitor pulled me from the depths of unconsciousness. My eyelids felt like lead weights as I struggled to open them, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room momentarily blinding me. As my vision slowly cleared, I became aware of a figure sitting beside my bed, Sheriff Dawson, his weathered face a mask of concern and barely contained anger. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Mr. Thompson," he said, his gravelly voice softer than I remembered. "You gave us quite a scare." I tried to speak, but my throat was parched. The sheriff quickly offered me a cup of water, which I gratefully accepted. After a few sips, I managed to croak out, "Sarah, Emily, they're safe," Sheriff Dawson assured me, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "A little worse for wear, but they're recovering. You're the one who had us worried. That knife wound was deeper than we thought. You've been out for 3 days." Shock paralyzes me as I struggle to process this information. 3 days? It felt like only moments had passed since our desperate flight through the woods. "Cletus?" I asked, dreading the answer. The sheriff's expression darkened. "In custody, along with Mabel and Lulu. Jeb, well, he didn't make it. Bled out from the injuries you gave him before we could get him to a hospital." I should have felt relieved, maybe even triumphant. Instead, a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. "It's not over, is it?" I asked, meeting the sheriff's gaze. He shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid not, son. What we found at that compound, it goes deeper than we ever imagined. Cletus and his family, they weren't working alone." My mind reels as I uncover the true scope of this cannibalistic network, stretching far beyond this backwoods family. "What do you mean?" I asked, pushing myself up into a sitting position despite the pain that shot through my side. Sheriff Dawson sighed heavily, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We found records, Mr. Thompson. Ledgers, correspondence, even a damn client list. Cletus wasn't just killing for his family's consumption. He was providing product to others. Rich folks with sick appetites, spread all across the country. I felt the bile rise in my throat as the implications of his words sank in. How many? Too many, the sheriff said grimly. We're talking about a network that spans at least a dozen states, hundreds of victims over the years, and the people involved, judges, politicians, business leaders, people with the power to cover this up. Determination steels my resolve as I realize I must survive to expose this horrifying truth. What can we do? I asked, my voice stronger now. We can't let them get away with this. Sheriff Dawson leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. That's why I'm here, Mr. Thompson. We need your help. You, Sarah, and Emily. You're our star witnesses. But more than that, you've seen things, experienced things that could blow this whole case wide open. I nodded, ignoring the pain that throbbed through my body. Whatever you need, Sheriff, I'm in. He smiled, but it was a grim expression. I was hoping you'd say that, because from here on out, things are going to get dangerous. These people, they have resources, influence. They'll stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. As if to underscore his point, a commotion erupted in the hallway outside my room. Raised voices, the sound of running feet. Sheriff Dawson was on his feet in an instant, his hand going to the gun at his hip. The door burst open and a nurse rushed in, her face pale with fear. "Sheriff," she gasped. "It's the other survivors, Sarah and Emily. They're gone." Fear and disgust war within me as I'm forced to make unthinkable choices to stay alive. "What do you mean gone?" I demanded, already trying to swing my legs out of bed. "Were they taken?" The sheriff gently but firmly pushed me back. "Easy, son, you're in no condition to be moving around." To the nurse, he barked, "Lock down the hospital, no one in or out, and get me the security footage now." As the nurse hurried off, Sheriff Dawson turned back to me, his expression grave. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to think carefully. Is there anywhere Sarah and Emily might have gone? Any place they mentioned that could be a safe house or meeting point?" I racked my brain, trying to remember every conversation, every scrap of information from our harrowing ordeal. And then it hit me. "The truck," I said, my eyes widening. Emily had a truck, one that belonged to another victim. She said she found it when she escaped. It could still be where we left it, in the woods near Cletus's compound. The sheriff nodded, already pulling out his phone. "It's a long shot, but it's all we've got. I'll send a team to check it out." He paused, fixing me with an intense stare. "Mr. Thompson, I shouldn't be telling you this, but given the circumstances, we have reason to believe there might be a mole in the department, someone feeding information to the network." The implications of his words sent a chill down my spine. If there was a traitor in law enforcement, nowhere was safe. Not the hospital, not police custody, nowhere. "You think Sarah and Emily figured it out?" I said slowly. "That's why they ran." Sheriff Dawson nodded grimly. "It's possible, which means we need to move fast. These girls are our best chance at cracking this case wide open, but they're also in terrible danger." A glimmer of hope sparks as I discover a potential means of communication with the outside world. "Sheriff," I said, an idea forming. "Emily mentioned that Cletus's network used markers, signs that most people wouldn't notice. If we could figure out their system, we might be able to track them," the sheriff finished, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Good thinking, son, but we'll need your help to decipher these signs. Think you're up for a little field trip?" I nodded, already pushing myself up again. "Just try and stop me." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Against the doctor's orders, I was discharged into Sheriff Dawson's custody. As we drove towards the location where Emily and I had left the truck, the sheriff filled me in on the investigation's progress. "We've identified at least 30 high-profile individuals connected to this network," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Senators, CEOs, even a federal judge. But without hard evidence and testimony from survivors like you and the girls, it'll be nearly impossible to make the charges stick." I stared out the window, watching the landscape blur by. And with a mole in the department, gathering that evidence becomes even more dangerous, I mused. The sheriff nodded grimly. Exactly. Which is why finding Sarah and Emily is crucial. They're not just victims, they're our key to bringing this whole sick operation down. As we neared the turnoff to the dirt road where we'd left the truck, a thought struck me. Sheriff, I said slowly, what if Sarah and Emily aren't running from your mole? What if they're running towards something? He glanced at me sharply. What do you mean? Emily was captive for months, maybe longer, I explained, the pieces falling into place in my mind. She must have overheard things, learned secrets. What if she knows about a place, a central location for the network, somewhere with evidence that could expose everything? The sheriff's eyes widened as he considered the possibility. And they didn't tell us because they weren't sure who to trust, he finished. Damn, if you're right, they could be walking into a trap. We reached the clearing where Emily and I had parked the truck only to find it empty. But there, carved into a nearby tree, was a symbol, a circle with 2 parallel lines running through it. There, I said, pointing. That's one of their markers. Emily said it means safe passage or something like that. Sheriff Dawson examined the symbol closely. Good eye, son. This is fresh, couldn't be more than a few hours old. We're on the right track. As we followed the trail of markers deeper into the woods, my mind was racing. What had Sarah and Emily discovered? And more importantly, were we going to reach them in time? The trail led us to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of a small town. The building looked decrepit, with boarded-up windows and graffiti-covered walls. But there, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, was another symbol carved into the rusted metal door. This is it, I said, my heart pounding. They're here. Sheriff Dawson drew his weapon, his expression grim. Stay behind me, he ordered. And if anything happens, you run, understand? I nodded, though we both knew I had no intention of leaving if things went south. The door creaked open ominously as we entered. The interior was dark, the air thick with dust and the musty smell of abandonment. But as our eyes adjusted, we saw signs of recent activity. Footprints in the dust, a door left slightly ajar. We moved deeper into the building, every creaking floorboard and shifting shadow setting my nerves on edge. And then we heard it, voices coming from a room up ahead. Can't believe what we found. Sarah's voice drifted out, tense with excitement and fear. This is it, Emily. This is everything we need to bring them down. I know, Emily replied, her tone grim. But we need to move fast. It won't take them long to realize what we've taken. Sheriff Dawson and I exchanged a look. This was it. We'd found them, and apparently, they'd found the evidence we so desperately needed. But before we could make our presence known, another voice spoke, one that made my blood run cold. Well, well, the newcomer drawled, the sound of a gun being cocked echoing in the empty space. Looks like we've got ourselves some nosy little rats. And here I thought I'd taken care of all our loose ends. Sheriff Dawson tensed beside me, his face pale in the dim light. Johnson, he whispered, horror and betrayal evident in his voice. My own deputy. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The mole wasn't just some low-level officer. It was the sheriff's right-hand man. As we stood there, caught between the need to help Sarah and Emily and the knowledge that we were now hopelessly outnumbered, one thought echoed through my mind. The truth of this conspiracy was even darker and more far-reaching than we could have imagined. And now, trapped in this abandoned warehouse with a traitor and who knew how many other enemies, we were in more danger than ever before. The tension in the abandoned warehouse was palpable, the air thick with dust and fear. Sheriff Dawson and I were frozen in place, our minds racing to process the betrayal we'd just uncovered. Deputy Johnson's voice continued to echo through the cavernous space, each word dripping with malice. Come on out, girls, Johnson called, his tone mockingly sweet. No need to make this harder than it has to be. Just hand over what you found, and maybe I'll make it quick for you. I could hear Sarah's panicked breathing, the rustle of papers, as Emily presumably tried to hide or protect whatever evidence they'd discovered. Sheriff Dawson's hand tightened on his weapon, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, and grim determination. "We need to do something," I whispered urgently. "They're sitting ducks in there." The sheriff nodded, his jaw clenched. "Johnson," he called out, stepping into view with his gun raised, "drop your weapon and put your hands where I can see them." The silence that followed was deafening. Then a low chuckle broke the tension. "Well, if it isn't the esteemed Sheriff Dawson," Johnson drawled. "Come to join the party? And I see you've brought our miracle survivor with you. How convenient." "It's over, Johnson," Sheriff Dawson said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "We know about the network, the corruption. There's no way out of this." Another laugh, this one edged with something darker. "Oh, I think you'll find there's always a way out, Sheriff. The question is, are you smart enough to take it when it's offered?" My hands shake as I desperately try to send out an SOS, praying it reaches someone. While the sheriff kept Johnson distracted, I slowly reached for my phone, thankful that the hospital had returned my personal effects. If I could just get a message out, maybe to the state police or FBI. "Don't do anything stupid, boy." Johnson's voice cut through my thoughts. I looked up to see him standing in the doorway, his gun trained squarely on my chest. Sarah and Emily were behind him, their faces pale with terror. "Hands where I can see them. Now." I raised my hands slowly, my phone clutched in one palm. Johnson's eyes narrowed. "Toss it here, slowly." My mind raced, desperately seeking a way out of this nightmare. As I prepared to throw my phone, inspiration struck. "Okay," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Catching." I made a show of tossing the phone underhand, but at the last second I flicked my wrist, sending it spinning through the air. Johnson instinctively reached to catch it, his gun hand lowering for just a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Sheriff Dawson needed. He lunged forward, tackling Johnson to the ground. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. I heard Sarah scream, saw Emily pulling her down to the floor. "Run!" I yelled to the girls. "Get out of here now!" They didn't need to be told twice. Sarah and Emily bolted past the struggling men, clutching a stack of papers and what looked like a hard drive. As they reached me, Emily pressed something into my hand, a small nondescript USB drive. "Insurance," she whispered, her eyes wild. "In case we don't make it." Before I could respond, another shot rang out. Sheriff Dawson cried out in pain, and I saw blood blossoming on his shoulder. Johnson was back on his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You're all dead," he snarled, raising his gun again. "You hear me? Dead." Dread fills me as I hear footsteps approaching, time running out. The sound of multiple vehicles screeching to a halt outside the warehouse told us that Johnson's backup had arrived. We were out of time. "This way," Emily hissed, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards a rusted metal staircase. Sarah was already halfway up, the evidence clutched tightly to her chest. We raced up the stairs, the metal groaning ominously under our weight. Behind us, I could hear Johnson shouting orders, the heavy tread of boots as more men entered the building. The second floor of the warehouse was a maze of abandoned offices and storage rooms. Emily led us through the labyrinth with surprising confidence, and I realized she must have scouted this place out beforehand. "There's a fire escape on the north side," she panted as we ran. "If we can just reach it." A bullet whizzed past my ear, embedding itself in the wall ahead of us. I risked a glance back to see Johnson at the top of the stairs, his face a mask of fury. "Keep going," I yelled, grabbing a rusty file cabinet and toppling it behind us. It wouldn't stop them for long, but every second counted. We burst through a door and found ourselves on a narrow metal walkway that ran along the outside of the building. The fire escape was just ahead, a rickety-looking structure that was our only hope of escape. Sarah reached it first, practically flying down the metal steps. Emily was right behind her, but as I put my foot on the first step, a searing pain exploded in my leg. I stumbled, nearly falling over the railing. "Mike!" Emily cried, reaching for me. "Go!" I gasped, the pain almost blinding. "Get out of here! I'll hold them off!" Emily's face contorted with anguish, torn between escaping with the evidence and helping me. In that moment of indecision, I made the choice for her. I pressed the USB drive she'd given me into her hand and shoved her towards the stairs. "Run," I said, meeting her eyes. "Finish this." With a choked sob, she turned and fled down the fire escape. I could hear Sarah calling for her from below. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I turned to face our pursuers. Johnson emerged onto the walkway, flanked by two burly men in dark clothing. His eyes gleamed with triumph as he saw me standing alone. "End of the line, hero," he sneered, raising his gun. "Any last words?" My hands shake as I desperately try to send out an SOS, praying it reaches someone. In that moment, I remembered my phone. It was still in the warehouse where I'd thrown it, but if I could just activate the emergency SOS feature. I closed my eyes, focusing all my concentration on the mental command to activate the feature. It was a long shot, a feature I'd never used before, but it was my only hope. "Yeah," I said, opening my eyes to glare defiantly at Johnson. "I do have some last words. Siri, send emergency SOS." For a moment, nothing happened. Johnson's face twisted in confusion, then amusement. "That's it? That's your big plan? Talking to your imaginary AI friend?" But then faintly from inside the warehouse, we heard a robotic voice. "Sending emergency SOS with your current location to your emergency contacts and local emergency services." Johnson's eyes widened in shock and fury. "No!" he roared, lunging forward. Relief washes over me as the message sends, just as I'm discovered. But that relief was short-lived. Johnson's hand closed around my throat, slamming me against the railing. The rusty metal groaned ominously under the impact. "You think you've won?" he snarled, his face inches from mine. "This goes deeper than you can imagine. They'll bury this, just like they've buried everything else. And you'll be just another tragic accident." The railing gave way with a screech of tearing metal. For a heart-stopping moment, I felt myself falling backwards into open air. Johnson's grip on my throat the only thing keeping me from plummeting to the ground below. Time seemed to slow. I saw the shock on Johnson's face as he realized what was happening. I heard shouts from below. Sarah and Emily, I thought, though it was hard to tell through the rush of blood in my ears. And then we were falling. The world spun around us as we plummeted, the ground rushing up to meet us with terrifying speed. The impact, when it came, was both more and less than I expected. There was pain, yes. A white-hot explosion that consumed every nerve in my body. But there was also a strange sense of detachment, as if I was watching it all happen to someone else. Agony rips through me as punishment is swiftly delivered, but hope keeps me going. Through the haze of pain, I was dimly aware of voices, of hands touching me. Sarah's tear-streaked face swam into view, her lips moving, though I couldn't make out the words. I tried to speak, to tell them about the USB drive, about the evidence. But no sound would come. The edges of my vision were growing dark, the world fading away. The last thing I saw before consciousness fled was a flurry of activity. Police cars, ambulances, their lights painting the night in surreal patterns of red and blue. Help had arrived, I realized, with a sense of profound relief. We'd done it. We'd gotten the message out. As the darkness claimed me, one final thought echoed through my mind. It wasn't over yet. The truth was out there now, waiting to be uncovered. And somehow, some way, I had to survive to see it through. Darkness descends as I'm thrown back into isolation, clinging to the belief that help is coming. The world faded to black, and I knew no more. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment slowly pulled me from the depths of unconsciousness. My eyelids felt like lead weights as I struggled to open them, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room momentarily blinding me. As my vision cleared, I became aware of a figure sitting beside my bed. Not Sheriff Dawson this time, but a woman in a crisp suit, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Welcome back, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice calm and professional. "I'm Special Agent Larson with the FBI. You've been through quite an ordeal." I tried to speak, but my throat was parched. Agent Larson quickly offered me a cup of water, which I gratefully accepted. After a few sips, I managed to croak out, "Sarah, Emily, are they—" "They're safe," Agent Larson assured me, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thanks to your actions, we were able to extract them and secure vital evidence against the network. You've done a great service, Mr. Thompson." My heart leaps as I hear the distant sound of sirens, a cavalry I never thought would come. "The USB drive?" I asked. Memories of those final moments in the warehouse flooding back. Agent Larson nodded, a grim smile playing on her lips. "In our possession. The data it contained has blown this case wide open. We're looking at one of the largest human trafficking and organized crime busts in U.S. history." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It hadn't all been for nothing. We'd made a difference. "What about Johnson?" I asked, the memory of his betrayal still raw. The agent's expression darkened. "Dead. The fall killed him instantly. But his death has opened up a whole new can of worms. The level of corruption we're uncovering, it goes higher than we ever imagined." As she spoke, I became aware of activity in the hallway outside my room. Raised voices, the sound of hurried footsteps. Agent Larson tensed, her hand moving to the gun at her hip. "What's going on?" I asked, pushing myself up despite the pain that shot through my body. "We've had some security concerns," she said carefully. "There are still elements of the network at large, and they're not happy about the evidence we've acquired. We're in the process of moving you to a secure location." Terror grips me as our captors fly into a frenzy, determined to cover their tracks. The door burst open, and a nurse rushed in, her face pale with fear. "Agent Larson," she gasped. "We've got a breach in the East Wing. Unknown number of hostiles." Agent Larson was on her feet in an instant, barking orders into her radio. "This is Larson. We need immediate evac for the witness. East Wing compromised. All available units converge on my location." She turned to me, her expression grave. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to listen carefully. We're going to get you out of here, but I need you to do exactly as I say. Can you walk?" I nodded, already swinging my legs over the side of the bed. The pain was intense, but adrenaline was quickly pushing it to the background. "I'll manage," I said through gritted teeth. Agent Larson helped me to my feet, supporting most of my weight. "Stay close to me," she instructed, drawing her weapon. "If I tell you to run, you run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate, understand?" I nodded again, my heart pounding in my chest. This was really happening. The network was making its move, determined to silence us once and for all. We moved into the hallway, which was now a scene of controlled chaos. Medical staff were hurriedly evacuating patients, while armed agents took up defensive positions at key points. "This way," Agent Larson said, guiding me towards a service elevator at the end of the corridor. "We have a vehicle waiting in the basement." We had barely made it halfway when the sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere deeper in the hospital. Screams and shouts filled the air, adding to the cacophony. Chaos reigns as a fierce battle erupts between law enforcement and the cannibalistic cult. Agent Larson pushed me behind a nurse's station, her gun trained on the intersection ahead. "Stay down," she ordered, her voice tense. I peered over the counter, my heart in my throat. At the far end of the corridor, I could see figures in black tactical gear advancing, their weapons at the ready. They moved with a precision that spoke of professional training. These weren't just some backwoods cannibals, but highly skilled operatives. "Larson to all units," the agent spoke into her radio, her voice low and urgent. "Hostiles on the 3rd floor, North Corridor. They're well armed and organized. We need backup now." The response came back garbled, but I could make out enough to know that help wasn't coming anytime soon. We were on our own. "Change of plans," Agent Larson said, her eyes scanning the area for options. We need to find another way out. Just then, a voice called out from the direction of the advancing hostiles. We know you're there, Agent Larson, and we know you have Thompson. Give him up, and maybe we'll let you walk away from this. I recognized that voice. It was Lulu, Cletus's daughter. How had she escaped custody? And more importantly, how had she assembled this kind of force so quickly? Agent Larson's grip on her weapon tightened. Not going to happen, she called back. Stand down now or we will use lethal force. Lulu's laugh echoed down the corridor, a sound that sent chills down my spine. Oh, honey, you have no idea what kind of force we're prepared to use. Last chance. Give us Thompson, or we'll paint these walls with both your blood. Hope and despair war within me as I realize my rescue is so close, yet still so far. I turned to Agent Larson, my mind racing. We need a distraction, I whispered. Something to draw their attention while we make a break for it. She nodded, her eyes scanning our surroundings. Then her gaze landed on the fire alarm on the wall behind us. It's not much, but it might buy us a few seconds of confusion, she said. Without waiting for a response, she reached back and pulled the lever. Immediately, the hallway was filled with the ear-piercing wail of the alarm, and sprinklers began to rain down water from the ceiling. Now, Agent Larson shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me to my feet. We ran, or rather stumbled in my case, towards a door marked stairs at the opposite end of the corridor. Behind us, I could hear shouts of confusion, then anger as our enemies realized what we'd done. The stairwell was dark and echoing, our footsteps and labored breathing seeming impossibly loud. We descended as quickly as my injured body would allow, the sounds of pursuit growing closer with each passing moment. 2 more floors, Agent Larson panted as we rounded another landing. Vehicles waiting in the underground parking, but as we burst through the door to the ground floor, we found our path blocked. 3 men in tactical gear stood there, their weapons trained on us. End of the line, one of them growled. Drop your weapon and step away from Thompson. Agent Larson's gun swung between the 3 men, her body tense as a coiled spring. I could see her mind working, calculating odds, looking for any advantage. In that moment of tense standoff, a deafening explosion rocked the building. The floor shook beneath our feet and dust rained down from the ceiling. What the hell was that? One of the men exclaimed, his attention momentarily diverted. It was all the opening Agent Larson needed. In a blur of motion, she fired 3 rapid shots. 2 of the men went down, clutching their legs. The third managed to get off a shot of his own before Agent Larson's bullet found its mark. My world explodes into pain and confusion as a stray bullet finds its mark. A white-hot agony erupted in my shoulder, spinning me around and sending me crashing to the floor. Through the haze of pain, I heard Agent Larson calling my name, felt her hands pressing down on the wound. Stay with me, Thompson, she urged, her voice seeming to come from very far away. We're almost out. Just hold on. I wanted to tell her to leave me, to get herself to safety. But the words wouldn't come. The world was growing dim around the edges, the pain fading into a strange, detached numbness. More explosions rocked the building, closer this time. The air was filled with dust and the acrid smell of smoke. Through my fading consciousness, I became aware of new voices, shouted orders, the sound of heavy boots on concrete. FBI, everyone down. Hands where we can see them. Agent Larson's voice filled with relief. Took you long enough. We need a medic here, now. As darkness began to close in, I felt myself being lifted, carried. The cool night air hit my face, a stark contrast to the smoky heat of the hospital. Hang in there, Mr. Thompson, a new voice said as I was loaded into what I assumed was an ambulance. You're safe now. We've got you. With those words echoing in my mind, I finally surrendered to the encroaching darkness. The last thing I was aware of was the wail of sirens and the sensation of movement as we sped away from the chaos of the hospital. In that final moment of consciousness, a single thought crystallized in my mind. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I dared to hope that we might actually win this fight. As the ambulance raced through the night, carrying me towards an uncertain future. I clung to that hope like a lifeline. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. The battle for justice had only just begun. Consciousness returned slowly. The sterile smell of a hospital a stark contrast to my recent hell. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment slowly filters through the fog in my mind, anchoring me to reality. I blink, my eyes adjusting to the soft light filtering through half-drawn blinds. This room is different from the last, smaller, more secure. A figure sits in a chair by the window, their silhouette familiar. "Sarah," I croak, my voice rough from disuse. The figure turns and I see I was right. Sarah's face is pale and drawn, dark circles under her eyes speaking of sleepless nights, but she's alive. She's here. "Mike," she breathes, rushing to my bedside. "You're awake. We've been so worried." I try to sit up, wincing as pain shoots through my shoulder. Sarah gently pushes me back down. "Easy," she says. "You've been out for almost a week. That bullet did a number on you." A week? My mind reels, trying to piece together the fragmented memories of the hospital attack. "Emily?" I ask, suddenly fearful. "Agent Larson?" "They're fine," Sarah assures me quickly. "Emily's giving her statement to the FBI right now. And Agent Larson, well, let's just say she's become something of a hero. Her actions during the attack have blown this whole case wide open." Relief washes over me, but it's short-lived as the full implications of what happened begin to sink in. "The network," I say, meeting Sarah's eyes. "How bad is it?" Sarah's expression turns grim. "Bad," she says simply, "but also good in a way. The attack on the hospital was so brazen, so public that there's no way to cover it up. It's all over the news. The FBI has been making arrests left and right. Judges, politicians, business leaders. It's like dominoes falling." I nod, processing this information. "And Cletus's family? Lulu?" "Dead," Sarah says, her voice hard. "Lulu didn't make it out of the hospital. Mabel was killed in a shootout with the FBI 2 days ago. As for Cletus..." She trails off, a haunted look in her eyes. "What?" I press, sensing there's more to the story. Sarah takes a deep breath. "He escaped custody during the initial chaos, but yesterday, they found his body in the woods near his old compound. It looks like he went back there to retrieve something, maybe evidence he'd hidden, but he never made it out." I feel a complex mix of emotions at this news. Relief that he can never hurt anyone again, but also a strange sense of anticlimax. After everything we'd been through, it seemed almost anticlimactic for Cletus to meet his end alone in the woods. Before I can dwell on it further, the door opens and Agent Larson enters, followed closely by Emily. The agent looks tired but satisfied, while Emily's face lights up when she sees me awake. "Mr. Thompson," Agent Larson says, a small smile playing on her lips. "Good to see you back with us. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," I admit. "But alive, thanks to you." She waves off my gratitude. "Just doing my job. But we're not done yet. Not by a long shot." Emily moves to stand beside Sarah, her hand finding the other woman's in a gesture that speaks volumes about what they've been through together. "Mike," she says, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something you need to know." I brace myself, sensing that whatever is coming isn't going to be easy to hear. Agent Larson takes over. "The USB drive you managed to secure, it contained more than just evidence of the cannibalistic network. It had financial records, blackmail material, details of operations that go far beyond what we initially thought we were dealing with." She pauses, letting this sink in before continuing. "We're not just talking about a group of backwoods cannibals anymore. This network has tendrils in human trafficking, organ harvesting, even potential links to international terrorism. The deeper we dig, the worse it gets." I feel the weight of this revelation settling on me like a physical thing. "So, what happens now?" I ask, looking between the three women. Now, Agent Larson says, her voice filled with grim determination, we need your help to bring it all down. Your testimony, combined with Sarah and Emily's and the evidence we've gathered, it could be the key to unraveling this whole operation. Relief and grief intermingle as I learn of my rescue and the fate of my fellow captives. But it's not over, I say, understanding dawning. They'll keep coming for us, won't they? As long as we're alive to testify. Sarah nods, her face set in lines of determination. That's why we're here, Mike. We're being moved to a secure location. Witness protection. The reality of what this means hits me hard. A new life, a new identity, leaving behind everything and everyone I've ever known. But as I look at Sarah and Emily, at the bond forged between us through our shared trauma and survival, I realize that maybe, just maybe, it's a price worth paying. Okay, I say, my voice stronger than I feel. I'm in. Whatever it takes to end this, once and for all. Agent Larson nods approvingly. Good. We'll begin the preparations as soon as you're cleared by the doctors. In the meantime, there's someone here who'd like to see you. She steps aside, revealing a figure I hadn't noticed before. Sheriff Dawson, his arm in a sling but very much alive. Sheriff, I breathe, a weight I didn't even know I was carrying lifting from my shoulders. He approaches the bed, his weathered face creased with a mixture of relief and regret. Hello, son, he says gruffly. You gave us quite a scare. Determination fills me as I vow to testify, to bring this nightmare to light. I thought, with Johnson, I wasn't sure who to trust anymore, I admit. The sheriff's face darkens at the mention of his former deputy. Johnson fooled us all, he says heavily. But thanks to you, to all of you. He includes Sarah and Emily in his gaze. We've got a chance to make this right, to clean house from top to bottom. As we talk, I learn more about the extent of the investigation. The FBI has set up a special task force, working in conjunction with local law enforcement agencies across multiple states. The case has even attracted international attention, with Interpol getting involved due to the global reach of the network. It's going to be a long road, Agent Larson warns us. The trial alone could take months, maybe even years, and that's assuming we can keep you all safe until then. A bittersweet victory washes over me as justice is served, but the scars remain. I nod, understanding the gravity of what we're undertaking. Whatever it takes, I repeat, looking at Sarah and Emily. They nod in agreement, a silent pact forming between us. As the others begin to discuss the logistics of our upcoming move, I find my gaze drawn to the window. The world outside seems impossibly bright and normal, a stark contrast to the darkness we've experienced and the battles still to come. Sheriff Dawson notices my distraction. Penny for your thoughts, son? He asks quietly. I turn back to him, trying to find the words to express the tumult of emotions inside me. It's just, after everything that's happened, how do we go back to normal? How do we live with what we've seen, what we've been through? The sheriff's eyes soften with understanding. You don't, he says simply. You can't go back to who you were before, but you can move forward. You can use what you've been through to make a difference, to ensure that no one else has to endure what you did. His words resonate deeply, offering a purpose, a way to channel the trauma and pain into something meaningful. I nod, feeling a renewed sense of determination. As I drive away from the courthouse, a chill runs down my spine. For a moment, I swear I see Cletus's face in the crowd, and I realize this nightmare may never truly end. The memory of that final confrontation in the woods, of Cletus's last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of his empire, flashes through my mind. Even in death, his shadow looms large. But as quickly as it appears, the apparition vanishes, lost in the sea of faces. I shake my head, reminding myself that Cletus is gone, his reign of terror finally over. Yet the chill lingers, a reminder that the echoes of our ordeal will likely haunt us for years to come. The car pulls away from the curb, carrying us towards our new lives in witness protection. Sarah reaches over and squeezes my hand, a gesture of solidarity and support. Emily, in the front passenger seat, turns to give us a small, determined smile. We're survivors, the three of us, bound by experiences too horrific to fully comprehend, yet united in our determination to see justice done. As we drive into an uncertain future, I realize that while the nightmare of Cletus and his family may be over, our story, our fight, is far from finished. The road ahead will be long and fraught with danger. The network, though wounded, is far from defeated. There will be more battles, more sacrifices to be made. But looking at Sarah and Emily, feeling the weight of the evidence we carry and the truth we've sworn to tell, I know we're ready for whatever comes next. This chapter of our lives may be ending, but the war against the darkness we've uncovered is just beginning. And we'll face it together, one day at a time, until the last ember of this evil is finally extinguished. As the city fades into the distance behind us, I close my eyes, allowing myself a moment of peace. Whatever the future holds, we've taken the first step. We've survived. We've fought back. And we've ignited a spark of hope that, with time and perseverance, could grow into a blazing light of justice. The nightmare may never truly end, but neither will our determination to fight against it. And in that fight, in that unwavering resolve, we find our true strength and our path forward.